with the world abuzz with interplanetary headlines, it's curious to consider when these sightings truly started. Many attribute the birth of ufology to Kenneth Arnold's 1947 flying saucer sighting. Kenneth Arnold was a salesman for the Great Western Fire Control Supply, based out of his hometown of Boise, Idaho. Arnold would frequently fly across the Northwest in a Call Air A2 and was a fairly competent aviator. He was in the midst of a trip from Chehalis, Washington to Yakima, Washington, when he diverted his course to assist in the search of a downed Marine Corps plane, in hopes of claiming the $5,000 award, or $50,000 modern day. Arnold was looking for the downed C-46 transport plane when a bright flashing light caught his attention, appearing to resemble sunlight reflecting from another aircraft's mirror. Scanning the air around him, Arnold feared he might be close to another aircraft, but could only spot a DC-4 about 24 kilometers to the northwest. Roughly 30 seconds after the first flash, Arnold saw a series of flashes come from the north side of Mount Rainier, about 35 kilometers away from his current location. Worried the reflection was coming from his own windows, he tilted the plane side to side, removed his eyeglasses, and rolled down his side window. The flashes continued. Initially believed to be a flock of geese because of the chain formation, Arnold quickly ruled this out based on the altitude, the odd glint, and the incredible speeds they reached. He claimed that 9 thin, convex objects approached Mount Rainier and quickly passed out front to his view. The movement was likened to a saucer skipping on water, and left Arnold with an incredibly eerie feeling. Arnold noticed the objects moving in echelon formation, with a single object standing out by being crescent-shaped. As a seasoned aviator, he used observation methods to estimate the speed and size of the aircrafts, measuring the size of the objects to be somewhere close to a DC-4. Arnold adjusted his course roughly parallel to the fleet and continued to try to observe the formation, believing it to be test flights of a new U.S. military aircraft. He noticed the objects were level on a horizontal plane, but would dip and weave in unison to avoid the peaks and ridges of Mount Rainier, with brilliant flashes resonating from each maneuver. Estimating distances from a sub-peak of Mount Rainier to the nearby Mount Adams, Arnold claims that the objects traveled the distance in a span of 1 minute and 40 seconds. Arnold's estimations place the speed anywhere between 1,900 to 2,700 kilometers per hour, believed to be 3 times as fast as any manned aircraft at the time. Coincidentally, the U.S. Air Force would be established as a separate service 3 months later and break the sound barrier for the first time 4 months later in the Mojave Desert. Arnold landed in Yakima around 4 p.m. and immediately told his friend and airport manager, Al Baxter. Word quickly spread around the airport, and before he traveled on to an air show in Pendleton, Oregon, pilots there were already full of questions. In his account to AAF Intelligence, he claims that they did not scoff or laugh, and instead suggested he had maybe seen guided missiles or a new type of aircraft. A few former Army pilots offered an alternative explanation of something they recalled from World War II. These pilots claimed that they were briefed before combat that they might encounter similar objects described by Arnold, known by military personnel as Foo Fighters. Countless independent reports of these crafts cropped up from 1944 onwards, with a near entirety of witnesses coming from military personnel. The descriptions of Foo Fighters across Western Europe were astoundingly similar to Arnold's version. Fast-moving, flashing objects that appeared to fly unison in formation, as if they were under intelligent control. The Allies suspected it to be an advanced German weapon, even discussing the phenomenon in an official AAF press release. Discussion of the Foo Fighters was so prevalent that it even reached American newspapers during January 1945. Arnold gave his first interview to the press on June 25, 1947. By the 26th, the story was widespread across national newspapers. The American public erupted in excitement, and reporting newspapers would coin the iconic term flying saucer. Arnold's story not only seemed credible when held under scrutiny, but was corroborated by 16 similar stories on the very same day, and hundreds more over the following weeks. 6 accounts are of particular interest. Fred Johnson was a prospector working on Mount Adams around the same time frame as Arnold's encounter. He recalls seeing 6 round, tapered ovals that were sharp to a point. He also recalls the objects disturbing his compass. Ironically, Johnson's report was listed as the first unexplained UFO report in Air Force files, while Arnold's was classified as a mirage. This is all despite the fact it appears they are referencing the same incident. The next witness report of high interest was from a Forest Service lookout out of Salmon, Washington. The lookout claims to have seen shiny silver objects that produced distant flashes. He also didn't see any flying wings on the object, but believed that they were a new type of plane being tested. All on the same day of June 24th, another 2 witnesses came forward from Idaho to provide some of the most credible support to Arnold's story. Acting Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, Donald S. Whitehead, and Acting Head Justice of the Peace, J.M. Lampert, both report to have seen a comet-like object hanging in the western sky, wavering through the slopes of Mount Rainier. The next account of Decided the Feature comes days later from Los Angeles, California, and shared shockingly similar details. The wife of a bus driver was quoted as saying that her husband spotted objects moving through the sky at incredible speeds in an L formation, before eventually flashing out of sight. Another account that supported Arnold's story was based out of Manitou Springs, Colorado, when 7 employees of the railroad company claimed to have seen saucers similar to those described in Washington state. Lastly, we'll briefly examine the account deemed the primary corroborative sighting, originating from a United Airlines crew. While on a flight en route to Seattle, Captain Emil J. Smith and First Officer Ralph Stevens recalled seeing 9 disc-shaped objects that they followed behind but were unable to keep pace. They also recalled the crafts flying in a loose formation, with a single object higher than the rest and off to the right. The descriptions of the shape, flight formation, and behavior align closely with the previous stories, and curiously enough, happened 10 days after the Arnold sighting. Their aviation experience would lend the story massive credibility. After everything was said and done, there was 853 flying disc sightings collected in 1947 across 140 North American newspapers. Writer Ted Blocher collected these stories and reasoned that roughly 250 of them presented a genuine mystery. This included reports by pilots, scientists, multiple eyewitnesses, and those including photo evidence. The most notorious story to materialize from this period broke headlines 13 days after the Arnold story. Now known as the Roswell Ufo Incident, a report out of Roswell, New Mexico would become the darling of UFO conspiracists in the 1970s and lead to the popularization of Area 51 and ufology as a whole. Kenneth Arnold's seeming reluctance to the spotlight may have increased his credibility. He complained that after the story broke nationally on June 27th, his life had never been the same. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. I want to talk to the FBI or someone. Half the people look at me as a combination of Einstein, Flash Gordon, and Screwball. I wonder what my wife back in Idaho thinks. Arnold maintained a skepticism and openness to explanations, and in a telegram to the Portland, Oregon on June 28th, he expressed this. I'm certainly on your side of the fence, as I did not believe it either, but I have never suffered from snow blindness, mirages, or spots before my eyes of any kind. It wasn't until July 7, 1947 that Arnold brought forward the suggestion of potential extraterrestrial origins. He later reasoned to the Chicago Times that based on the object's maneuver and speed around Mount Rainier, it would have been impossible for a human to survive the pressure of the cabin. Although some speculated Arnold may have seen experimental U.S. military crafts known as the Flying Wing or Flying Flapjack, the military maintained that neither craft could account for the sightings. Arnold suggested that if the Army could not provide an explanation and would not claim the crafts, he could not understand how they could be from this planet. The Air Force would shortly begin conducting an investigation of the Arnold sighting, with intelligence assistance from the FBI. Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davidson of the Hamilton Field Airfield in California interviewed Arnold on July 12th and had him submit a written report. The report concluded that it is the present opinion of the interviewer that Mr. Arnold actually saw what he stated he saw. It is difficult to believe that a man of his character and apparent integrity would state that he saw objects and write up a report to the extent that he did if he did not see them. AF intelligence would also look into the claims of the sightings that followed, namely the United Airlines crew, which was identified as a key point of evidence. They arrived at a similar conclusion that the saucer reports were not imaginary or adequately explained by natural phenomena. This intelligence work is believed to have laid the groundwork for the Air Force's foray into UFO study, led by General Nathan Twining. This would eventually materialize into Project Saucer, later switched to Project Sign. Skeptics and UFO debunkers like Harvard astronomer Donald Menzel have put forth potential explanations to Arnold's story, including Arnold only saw snow clouds or the drift of snow blown off Mount Rainier. Arnold instead saw wave clouds that he mistook for aircrafts. Arnold simply confused water droplets on his airplane's windows. However, these snow clouds would have been unable to produce the bright flashes in high speed. Also, the skies are reported to be clear, and wave clouds are unable to produce flashes in the way described. And lastly, Arnold specifically mentioned rolling his windows down and still seeing the flashes. Unlike the relatively disproven Roswell incident, the truth behind Kenneth Arnold's story still remains to be discovered. The presence of UFOs were confirmed by the Pentagon early this year, and the declassified video appears similar to the initial Arnold description. Sadly, Arnold would not live to see his vindication and would pass away during the year of 1984, at the age of 68. Despite this, Arnold's account may soon be viewed in a different light than the skepticism of the past.